One man said, no. 8 billion people are alive because of it. The story of Vasily Arkhipov, the Soviet officer who prevented nuclear war and whose name nobody knows. On October 27, 1962, a single man prevented the nuclear destruction of human civilization. He was sitting in a submarine at the bottom of the ocean, surrounded by officers who were screaming at him to fire. He said no. His name was Vasily Arkhipov, and almost nobody on Earth knows it. To understand what happened on that submarine, you need to understand the world it was sailing through. It is October 1962. The United States has just discovered that the Soviet Union is building nuclear missile launch sites in Cuba, 90 miles from the coast of Florida. President Kennedy has imposed a naval blockade around the island. Soviet ships carrying more missiles are sailing toward it. The two most powerful nations in human history are pointing nuclear weapons at each other, and neither side is blinking. What almost nobody knows, not the Americans, not even most of the Soviet leadership, is that 4 Soviet submarines have already slipped through the blockade. Each one is carrying a single nuclear torpedo, a weapon with the destructive power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The submarines have been ordered to surface only if attacked. But they are also carrying secret instructions. In the absence of communication with Moscow, if the submarine comes under fire, the captain and political officer alone can authorize a nuclear launch, without waiting for orders from above. One of those submarines is B-59. And on board B-59, by a quirk of military protocol, there is a third officer whose signature is also required. His name is Vasily Arkhipov. By October 27th, the crew of B-59 has been submerged for days. They have had no contact with Moscow. They do not know whether war has begun or not. The air conditioning has failed. The temperature inside the submarine has reached 45 degrees Celsius. The carbon dioxide levels are rising. Men are passing out at their stations. Then the explosions start. Above the surface, 11 American destroyers and the aircraft carrier USS Randolph have located B-59. They begin dropping depth charges, not to destroy the submarine, but to force it to surface for identification. The Americans are using a special signal code they have shared with the Soviets for exactly this situation. But B-59 has never received that code. To the exhausted, overheated crew in the darkness below, the explosions feel like the beginning of a war. Captain Valentin Savitsky has had enough. He orders the nuclear torpedo to be armed. The political officer, Ivan Maslenikov, agrees. 2 of the 3 required signatures are in place. But to understand why Arkhipov said no, you need to know what he had already survived. Because this is not the first time he has faced this kind of pressure. 1 year earlier, in 1961, Arkhipov was the executive officer of the K-19, the Soviet Union's first nuclear ballistic missile submarine. During a training exercise in the North Atlantic, the K-19's reactor cooling system catastrophically failed. The reactor was on the verge of meltdown. Radio communications were down. The captain ordered 7 engineers into the reactor compartment to improvise a repair with no protective equipment. All 7 died within weeks from radiation poisoning. The entire crew, including Arkhipov, was exposed. Arkhipov survived, but his body carried that radiation for the rest of his life. He knows better than anyone in that submarine what a nuclear weapon does. Not from a briefing. Not from a textbook, from the inside of a melting reactor, watching his colleagues die. Captain Savitsky is screaming. He believes World War III has already started. He believes the men above them are trying to kill them. He believes that surfacing means capture or death. He believes the only honorable option is to fire. Vasily Arkhipov disagrees. What we know of the argument comes from witness testimony declassified decades later. Arkhipov makes two arguments with extraordinary calm. First, the depth charges are not destroying the submarine. If the Americans wanted them dead, they would already be dead. This is a signal, not an attack. Second, once that torpedo is fired, there is no going back. Not for the crew, not for Cuba, not for Moscow, not for Washington, not for anyone. The argument lasts an unknown amount of time. In a submarine running out of power, out of air, out of certainty about anything, one man holds the line. Arkhipov refuses to sign. Without his signature, the torpedo cannot be launched. He proposes instead that they surface, identify themselves, await orders from Moscow. On October 27, 1962, the single most dangerous day in the entire history of the Cold War, the day a US U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba and another nearly intercepted over Russia, the day President Kennedy's own advisors believed nuclear war was hours away. The Soviet submarine B-59 breaks the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. The Americans photograph it, signal it, and stand down. The moment passes. The Cuban Missile Crisis ended on October 28, 1962. Khrushchev announced the withdrawal of Soviet missiles from Cuba. Kennedy pledged not to invade. The world exhaled. And Vasily Arkhipov went home. He continued serving in the Soviet Navy. He was promoted to Rear Admiral in 1975, then Vice Admiral in 1981. He became head of the Kirov Naval Academy. He retired in the mid-1980s and settled in a small town near Moscow. The submarine commanders suppressed the story of what happened on B-59 for 40 years. His wife, Olga, later described him in a documentary as quiet, polite, and very calm. She said he liked to read the newspaper on holiday. He wanted to stay updated with the world as much as possible. She also remembered finding him burning their love letters once. He said keeping them would bring bad luck. He never discussed what he did on October 27, 1962. He died on August 19, 1998, of kidney cancer. Some medical accounts link the cancer directly to the radiation he absorbed on the K-19 in 1961. The accident that happened 1 year before the moment that defined his life. It was not until 2002, 4 years after his death, that the story became public. At a conference marking the 40th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, declassified Soviet records confirmed what had happened on B-59. Thomas Blanton, director of the National Security Archive at George Washington University, said of Arkhipov, "The man who saved the world." Robert McNamara, U.S. Secretary of Defense during the crisis, said that year, "We came very, very close to nuclear war, closer than we knew at the time." Historian Arthur Schlesinger, advisor to President Kennedy, called October 27, 1962, not merely the most dangerous moment of the Cold War, but the most dangerous moment in human history. According to declassified Soviet and American plans, the likely first targets of a nuclear exchange would have been Moscow, London, air bases across the United Kingdom, and troop concentrations in Germany. The chain of escalation that would have followed, calculated by the same military planners who designed those plans, pointed toward civilizational collapse. Vasily Arkhipov was in a submarine with no communications, no certainty, no rescue, and no way of knowing whether history would remember his name or even learn it. He had 2 colleagues demanding he sign. He had the weight of his country and its honor pressing down on him. He said no, quietly, firmly. Once. In 2017, the Future of Life Institute gave Vasily Arkhipov, posthumously, their inaugural award. The citation read simply, "For saving humanity. The world has never built him a monument. There is no national holiday in his name. Most of the people alive today and the 8 billion people whose existence depended on that single moment in the dark will never hear his name. Now you have. If this story should exist somewhere in the world where people can find it, subscribe. Every week we open another file. Next week, the woman who discovered what stars are made of and had her name taken off the paper.